The views expressed are not necessarily those of KSCJ and Powell Broadcasting Company. This program is not intended to replace the advice of doctors or other clinical providers. Consult with your practitioner to ensure the proper course of action for you.
Welcome to When Things Aren't Going Well on AM 1360, FM 94.9 KSCJ. This program is dedicated to your mental health wellness and brought to you by Family Services, a United Way partner agency. Here's your host, Art Silva.
Good morning, Siouxland. I'm Art Silva, and welcome to When Things Aren't Going Well. This show is dedicated to your mental wellness and how you can help yourself navigate the daily highway of life. Our show is brought to you by Family Services, a United Way partner agency serving the Siouxland community. Joining me today are my friends from Family Services, Chief Operating Officer Brenda Geisinger, and licensed therapist Rosie Strong. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, today we're going to talk about something that's kind of timely. We just went through a remembrance of 9/11, and that brought back a lot of memories, a lot of them very painful, but we also, how are people dealing with that 20 years later, and or just for something that could have happened just last week. So with PTSD, let's define it, Rosie.
Well, PTSD is when we've experienced an event in our lives. And if we're having ongoing types of memories, or we're feeling like on edge, or we're having trouble with sleeping, and we're just off in a sense, and it happens for a period of time. Many times when we have an event that happens in our life, we can maybe work through it within a month or two. But if these kinds of symptoms are continuing to happen for a period of time, then more than likely you're dealing with post-traumatic stress that's happened because of the circumstance or event that occurred.
I'll also add a traumatic event can be a one-time exposure, or it could be a repetitive exposure, such as a toxic relationship that you're involved in. You don't even realize it till the relationship has ended and you're experiencing some post-traumatic stress disorder. So it could be something as horrific as 9/11, or something that you're just repeatedly experiencing and you're starting to experience some distress, and what you're going to do to resolve those situations.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off on what she said for a minute here, because the other thing that sometimes we don't take a look at those people who observe a traumatic event, because that can also have an impact on you. You're not having the event happen, but you're outside of it and observing it, and that can leave those lingering trauma types of experiences too.
What are some of the symptoms that you could look for that would help define PTSD?
I think one of the big one is reliving the event. It's playing over and over in your mind, or it happens. It gets triggered at different times that. You might have a smell or a sound or something, and you're reliving it over and over again. I think the other thing is that when you're starting to avoid things that are reminding you of the circumstance that happened, like let's say you had a serious car accident, and then all of a sudden you're not wanting to drive, and 6 months has happened since then, and so more than likely you're probably dealing with some post-traumatic stress in regards to that. And another thing that I think sometimes tends to happen that we don't really think about is that we have negative thoughts that are just in our mind a lot that relate to the circumstance that has happened, and they're just kind of replaying from time to time to time. So I think and then the other one that's pretty, I think, significant is we're always keyed up. We're always on edge. We're kind of like hyper-vigilant or hyper-arousal kind of thing. And those are things that linger on for a period of time.
So you mentioned avoidance. And is that like if you fall off the horse, get back on it? Is avoidance a very common occurrence?
Avoidance is a common occurrence for a lot of things. And for trauma event, it's like we don't want to re-experience. We don't want to look at it. Like when we're having the COVID, there was a point in time, I know other people may have had it too. It's like, I just don't want to watch TV anymore because all I'm hearing is this, and I'm really concerned about going out in the public, kind of stuff. And so I think avoidance is one of those things that is a common, natural kind of thing. However, if you're avoiding all the time, you're also not helping yourself recover from the trauma that's happened.
My name is Art Silva, and you're joining us when things aren't going well. And with me today, we have Rosie Strunk and Brenda Geisinger from Family Services, and we're talking about PTSD. Rosie, Brenda, let me ask you, what are some of the trigger events that can bring back a memory of a traumatic experience?
I think, like Rosie mentioned, it could be a smell, it can be a song, it can be a similar like situation. So if you were in a car accident and you see a different car accident, it can come out of the blue. You just have no idea how it happened. And sometimes it can also, it's going to be a trigger. You hear about those that have served in the military. They may avoid fireworks and that sound. So different things can trigger different things for certain people. It's being aware of your triggers and how to handle those triggers. We talked about avoidance. There's good avoidance and there's bad avoidance. Sometimes avoiding going to fireworks because it's going to be upsetting is probably a very healthy choice. Avoiding something because it's going to cause problems and it's now interfering in your life and having a positive impact, that's bad avoidance. So if you're, avoiding all relationships, that's not healthy for someone. But if you're avoiding toxic relationships, that's a good avoidance. So different triggers do different things. It just depends on the situation and the person.
Yeah, I think.
I could think about things like anniversaries, birthdays,
Correct.
Holidays that come up every year. Could trigger some memories.
Oh, definitely. Like I'm going to put it into, we had the Flight 232. And our agency was involved with helping with the people in some form or fashion. And so when I think about that, we went through in just Sioux City the yearly anniversary of that, and it brought up memories for people like the first responders. I worked with somebody who lived by where the airport was and heard the crash, and so they were reacting to planes that were coming across in a sense. And so I think that those anniversary times bring back some of those memories, some of those experiences, the reactions that they have in the sense of their body. And so those things do happen. And I think sometimes when we know that our anniversary is coming up, I think we can plan for that and look at how we can manage whatever those emotions, triggers, memories that might be happening for us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can see holiday time sometimes creates a lot of anxiety, and a lot of the anxiety comes from previous holiday times.
Right.
And so
No kidding.
Kind of like you got to weigh this thing out. Do I go? Do I not go?
Mm-hmm.
Is Uncle Charlie going to be there? Oh no, and this and that. And it shouldn't be that way, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we deal with it? And I think Brenda sent it up. There's things you want to avoid. Okay, Uncle Charlie, and the people you want to see. So making that determination. Avoidance can be good. Avoidance can be bad.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think we need everybody, and you can get that strength off of folks. But it's important to recognize when someone isn't right, and what can you do to help them get some help?
I think that our support systems are our lifelines, and they can be a number of different people, be it church or friends or spouses or work people. Because I think that when we have our lifeline in the sense of people, our resources, we can go to them and it might be like a 5 minutes where we just got to say something or we just have to just be with somebody. And so one of those folks can be so helpful as we're going through our memories, our anniversaries, or whatever we might be experiencing.
Your memories aren't all bad. A lot of times
No.
in sharing the memories, you bring up a good laugh, a nice story. And it's a good way, I think, to deal with some of the trauma you're going through, or some of the feelings you're dealing with. Oh, Rosie, you can't be the support network, whatever it may be. And folks, you got them out there. You just don't know sometimes where they are, or you haven't found or discovered. But the worst thing you can do is sit in and stay isolated and just dwell on this. Oh, that's no good. Hey, we're coming up on our break, so we'll be right back here when things aren't going well after a short pause.
Let's face it, that happens to all of us. However, the pandemic has compounded all of our lives and activities. Even the simplest tasks seem harder. Hi, I'm Brenda Geisinger, the Chief Operating Officer at the Boys and Girls Home and Family Services. Family Services is a United Way partner agency serving children and families of our community, and we're here to help. If you'd like to learn more about Family Services, please contact us via email, website, Facebook, or phone Mary Pickens. At Family Services, we change lives.
Welcome back to When Things Aren't Going Well on KSCJ. Here's Art Silva.
Welcome back to When Things Aren't Going Well. I'm Art Silva along with Brenda Geisinger and Rosie Strunk. And today our topic has been PTSD. The first half of our show, we kind of defined it, talked about some of the symptoms of PTSD. And what we want to talk about in the second half of our show is examples of treatment. So with that, Rosie, okay, someone's been identified with PTSD or they think they got PTSD. What do you do?
Well, with treatment with folks who have PTSD, you're going to deal with the trauma. And what that means is you're going to walk through the event of what happened. However, they may need to walk through the event. So they may want to walk through the event from the very last thing that they remember and then walk backwards, or they might want to walk in the middle of it. So a lot of it depends upon where the person needs to be at the time. So it's not so much as, the therapist is saying, oh, let's start at the beginning and walk through it. It's about where do you want to start in regards to walking through your memory of the trauma. So we talk about trauma focused, and when we do that, that's about walking through the trauma. I think that there are different ways that all of us can utilize with helping people who are walking through trauma. Some of that is doing narrative writing, where a person may write their own story about what they experienced. And in that narrative, they may give a skeleton of what happened. You can go back and look at what were you feeling as to what happened, and then what were you thinking. So you're dealing with their feelings and their thoughts throughout the narrative, in a sense. So that's a piece of work that can take time, but it's also a self-exploratory process, and they're able to walk through this in a way that feels comfortable to them. So that's one of the ways that people walk through their trauma. There's, and I know Brenda said this is going to be confusing, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's EMDR, and it's eye movement process. And how I explain it is that we have the right brain and the left brain. We have our emotional brain and our intellectual brain. And when we're in a trauma, we get stuck in the emotional brain. And so what you're trying to do is to reconnect the emotional brain with the right brain. And that can be done with tapping in respects to on a person's knees, etc., following eye movement in front of their eyes, or we call them buzzies, where they hold them in their hands and it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so what happens is that they pick what they're needing to address. And a lot of it is the work in the brain. It's not so much the work I do, but it's the work in the brain from the processing. And so you're connecting one side of the brain to the other side of the brain. And it really helps their internal processing. And so you take a trauma piece, and then you work on that trauma piece through the EMDR process. And that's a pretty popular type of treatment approach for trauma. And then the other one is another one that we tend to use a lot is the cognitive processing. And I kind of mentioned that before, but it's about their thoughts. And we end up with a lot of negative thoughts sometimes about an event. And sometimes there's also survivor guilt about an event. And so that thought process can really bog us down also. So it's like helping them frame their negative thoughts and move it into more of a manageable, positive kind of thought that can take care of that.
I think one of the key things to always remember is there's no one approach for every person. We have lots of options, different avenues, and you're not going to be re-traumatized going through this. We're here to help and do it safely together and moving on the journey so you're able to function and handle life again, regardless of what's going on. So there are lots of options, and it's really exploring with your therapist what works best for you.
Yeah, and
That is great advice. Boy, I tell you, I think we always associate PTSD with military because that seems to be the way it's presented to us, where there are problems, and it's not. And so, to that end, what do you know if you have a loved one that has PTSD? How do you handle that?
That's an interesting experience that people who have someone who has PTSD, that the loved one also is experiencing emotions along with that person. And one of the things that I tend to do with folks is, if it's a spouse or relative or whatever the case might be, is to have them read up on PTSD. Because sometimes we kind of go, oh my gosh, they're just acting crazy. I don't know how to do this. They're really irritable. They're just moody all the time, or they're not wanting to do anything. They're just wanting to stay home, and I can't get them out. And so we're looking at how to educate the person who is also the loved one, first off, about the PTSD. The other thing is that once they understand things, they're probably going to be kinder to the person who is struggling with PTSD, and they're not going to be so reactive, because sometimes we get reactive to a circumstance, and we tend to kind of step back and respond to a situation and think about, okay, what's going on, what's happening, let's talk it through, and are more calmer, that I would say. And so I think that a big thing is educating them and then helping them with their emotions, because they're also going through maybe a roller coaster kind of thing. And so helping them manage their emotions as they're also working with and being with their partner or spouse or friend or relative.
I think sometimes when your loved one may be struggling with something and you may suspect it's PTSD, it doesn't matter what you want to call it. You know something's not right. And how to approach them of maybe we should talk to someone. Or when you ask the question, how are you? Don't go for the standard, oh, I'm fine, or I'm having a good day. It's really listening. We're given 2 ears, use them. So when you say, I've noticed something's a little off, you want to talk? Having more of an open-ended question versus the standard, how are you today? And again, you don't have to really say, I think you have PTSD, and they're going to run off into the hills and do bad avoidance. You really just want them to get better or get help. And so it's reaching out to them. And then also, what do you have to do to take care of yourself, like Rosie said?
Well, let's go back to the military. And when you hear PTSD, and of course we just got out of a war, but we've been in wars for a long time. I'm going to go all the way back to Vietnam because I want to talk about PTSD and the aging veteran. Does that create a different set of issues?
I think that for aging veterans, sometimes, and I want to make sure that I'm not an expert with the veterans. So, but sometimes that with the wars that have happened in the past, people have maybe learned how to cope with things, and then as they get older, they might have circumstances that happen in their life where they're struggling with medical kinds of issues, or they're retired and they're not as busy as what they used to be, and so their process of remembering circumstances starts to happen. And so all of a sudden they might be having some of the experiences that we've already talked about, where they're reliving their memories and being more conscientious about what's going on in the world, and sometimes being more overprotective and guarded. And just more alert to what's happening. And so they are struggling with the PTSD that surfaced up again for them.
Really interesting, and I'll tell you, we're talking about things now in our society that we really didn't talk about before. Maybe they weren't recognized as issues, and now that they're better defined, we know what to do with it. But there are successful outcomes. We want people to know that. We go through these symptoms and treatment, and it does work. So with that, we're kind of coming up to the end of our show, and we learned a lot today, but we're going to do a little bit of humor. Humor's good for the soul, so here we go. I want to die peacefully, in my sleep, like my grandfather did, not screaming in terror like the passengers in his car. Wake up, Grandpa. Okay, well, Rosie, Brenda, thank you very much. I want to thank our listening audience out there for their help today and listening in, and hope you learned something new. And I want to talk about employment opportunities at Boys and Girls Home and Family Services. Please check us out on the website. Shout out to Clausen. They did a great job for the Boys and Girls Home grand opening. We really appreciate their work on dressing the place up. Next week, our topic is going to be tailgating for our kids. So we'll see you right here next Saturday morning on 1360 94.9 KSCJ.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Happy trails to you till we meet again.